Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thanks for being here. Let's get back to it, shall we? Okay. The Great Collection Sutra states, there may perhaps be various kings of the Kshatriya class who act in a way contrary to the law, Myoho Renge Kyo, causing anguish to the voice hearers, disciples. If you'll recognize voice hearers as the stage of learning in the 10 worlds, but this is a specific class of monk learning, capable of learning, so on and so forth, voice hearers of the world-honored one. Perhaps they may curse and revile them, or beat and injure them with swords and staves, or deprive them of their robes and begging bowls and the other things they need. Or perhaps they may restrain and persecute those who give alms to the disciples. If there should be those who do such things, then we will see to it that their enemies in foreign lands rise up suddenly of their own accord and march against them, and we will cause uprisings to break out within their states. We will bring about pestilence and famine, unseasonable winds and rains, and contention, wrangling, and slander, and we will make certain that those rulers do not last for long, but that their nations are brought to destruction. As these passages from the sutras indicate, if I, Nichiren, were not here in Japan, then one might suppose that the Buddha was a teller of great lies for making such predictions, and that he could not escape falling into the Vici hell. We're specifically talking about Shakyamuni Buddha, but Nichiren never distinguishes or doesn't make a habit of distinguishing that it's Shakyamuni Buddha he's talking about, because there is only one human in human form who was given the appellation Buddha. Now, Buddha is a life state. We know that as we've studied Buddhism. We understand that Buddha is a life state of cognition, perception, clarity that we achieve while still in this samsaric reality, our mental conjuring of life, moment to moment, right? Our craving for permanence in things, possession. And when we achieve this, this Buddha mind, this Buddha awakening, this Buddha-ness, we cease to see the divisions and dissections of everything, and see everything as a conglomeration of energies that are of the same source, that are just different formations that we identify with our human mind, but that are in fact like ripples and waves on the ocean. It's just, waves are just a name we give to a characteristic of the ocean. They aren't independent in and of themselves. That's a phenomenal insight, and it's very hard to really get that to register deep within our perceptive filters of samsara, right? So when he references Shakyamuni, he just says the Buddha. He takes for granted, or not really takes for granted, but really he exemplifies the sense that Amida Buddha and Mahavarachana Buddha and all these other Buddhas of various names are not Buddha. They are tools to explicate different ways of conjuring in the mind the behaviors of Buddha. Not Buddha Shakyamuni, but Buddha the life condition. It can get very confusing here, but he casually, especially, and in these translations, he casually drops, suppose that the Buddha was a teller of, he's on the one hand talking about Shakyamuni because they're his teachings that we're reading. But on the other hand, he's also saying that this goal of enlightenment is a lie. Not that it is, but he's saying if it were so, then we would have to say that the whole thing's a lie. But it is not. It's obvious that it is not. And this is why Nichiren speaks in this way, right? On the 12th day of the 9th month, he goes on, in the 8th year of Bunei, I stood in the presence of Heino Simon and several hundred others and declared, quote, Nichiren is the pillar of Japan. Doing away with Nichiren is toppling the pillar of Japan. So speaking of himself in the third person, basically he's saying, I'm a truth teller, and by cutting my head off, you are cutting off the head of truth. Look at what will follow from that. Okay? The passages of scripture I have quoted indicate that if the rulers, heeding the slanderers of evil monks, or the vicious talk of others, should inflict punishment on persons of wisdom, then warfare will immediately break out, great winds will blow, and attackers will appear from foreign lands. In the 2nd month of the 9th year of Bunen in 1272, fighting did in fact break out between two factions of the ruling Hojo family. In the 4th month of the 11th year of Bunei, there were violent winds, and in the 10th month of the same year, the Mongol forces attacked Japan. Gee. Has not all of this come about because of the treatment that has been given to me, Nichiren? Again, Nichiren is not saying that he's a special thing. He's just saying that as the votary of the Lotus Sutra, as the one in the crowd pointing to the truth, being vilified is creating a karmic wind, cause and effect, once again. Can anyone be in doubt about the matter? Now, Nichiren says this with ultimate confidence, but he's also told us many times how he himself has had great, I guess you would say doubts, but they're doubts not in terms of what he knows to be true, but doubts in terms of is he up to the task? So there's always this humility in Nichiren that says, in a sense, if this were a modern tale, we'd say, why me? Why do I have to see this so clearly? How am I equipped to tell this truth to everyone against such massive powers, right? But I can't hold back. I can't not do it. I'll just do it as best I can, and we'll see. And the more he does it, the more substantiation there is for him doing it. And he's like, well, I can't let up. It's obviously got to be me, but oh man, right? He goes on, the errors preached by Kobo, Jikaku, these supposedly great teachers, and Chisho have for many long years have been spread about the country, and then on top of them have come the confusions propagated by the Zen and the Nembutsu schools. It's as though, in addition to adverse winds, one should be visited by huge waves and earthquakes as well. With all this, the nation has been brought to the verge of destruction. Because in Nichiren's day, and for quite a while afterward, actually, Japan is just an entire mess of internal battles of these different families, famine, weather events, all sorts of misery. And of course, there's always the Mongols or the Chinese or somebody wants to come and take advantage of their disarray and simply take over. I mean, that's just the state of the world, right? This egotistical avarice for possession. Mine, 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 mine. In a way, we haven't evolved past a 3-year-old just once. In the past, the Grand Minister of the state usurped the power of government, and after the Jokyu disturbance, the imperial court ceased to exercise its rule, and the seat of authority shifted to Kamakura. This is the whole change of the shogunate in Japan. But these were no more than internal disturbances. The nation as yet had not faced invasion from abroad. Things weren't as bad as they are recently. Moreover, though at that time there were those who slandered the law, there were also a few people who continued to uphold the correct doctrine of the Tendai school. Right? The Tendai school was active long after Dengyo had disappeared, even though these other detractors from the true word and later Zen and Nembutsu were chipping away at its influence and then saying, well, they're equal, and then saying, but this is better, and just moving people away over a few hundred years away from the Lotus Sutra, basically. And in addition, at that time, no wise person had appeared who would attempt to remedy the situation. Nobody was telling truth to power. They were just sort of going along, authoritarian style. As a result, things were relatively peaceful. Although in decline, there was nobody, going against the grain, so to speak. If the lion is sleeping and you do not wake him, he will not roar. If the current is swift, but you do not pull against it with your oar, no wave will rise up. If you do not accuse a thief to his face, he will remain unruffled. If you do not add fuel to the fire, it will not blaze up. In the same way, though there may be those who slander the law, if no one comes forward to expose their error, then the government will continue for the time being on its regular course, and the nation will remain undisturbed, although in constant decline, right? For example, when the Buddhist teachings were first introduced to Japan, nothing out of the ordinary occurred. But later, when Mononobe no Moriya began burning Buddhist statues, seizing monks, and putting the torch to Buddhist halls and padechas, then fire rained down from heaven, smallpox broke out in the nation, and there were repeated military crashes, right? A lot of disturbances. But the situation now is far worse. Today, those who slander the law fill the entire country, and I, Nichiren, by my existence, attack them, strong in my determination to uphold that what is right and just, not because he is right and just, but because the teachings guide his insight, and he's just parroting what the teachings say, what Buddha says, the enlightened and the man Shakyamuni, but Buddha life condition demands that you see truth. It doesn't put up with this other crap, right? So we battle no less fiercely than the Asuras and the deity Shakra, or the Buddha and the Devil King. The Golden Light Sutra states, quote, again with the scholarship, there will be times when the enemies among the neighboring states will begin to think as follows, quote, we must call out all 4 types of troops and destroy that country where the slanderers of the law live. The same sutra also says, quote, there will be times when the rulers of neighboring states, observing the situation and mobilizing their 4 types of troops, will make ready to set out for the country where the slanderers of the law live, determined to subdue it. At that time, we, the great deities, will instruct all the countless limitless number of yakshas and other deities who are our followers to assume disguises and protect these rulers, causing their enemies to surrender to them without difficulty. So this is what I was saying earlier. When the country is in disarray, other countries pay attention and think, here's our opportunity to go and sack this country and take it over, right? The same thing happens today. In fact, to the point where today our political realities, for quite some time now, have been to go and instigate unrest so that the unrest will qualify as you could say a preemptive strike, because then you go in, everything's in this, no one can assemble, no one's organized enough to assemble a force against you. So you just go in and clean up, right? This is empire building. This has been going on for centuries, right? So Nichiren goes on, the Sovereign King Sutra states the same thing, as do the Great Collection and Benevolent Kings Sutra. According to the statements of these various sutras, if the ruler of a state persecutes those who practice the correct teaching, and instead sides with those who practice erroneous teachings, then the heavenly kings Brahma and Chakra, the deities of the sun and moon, and the four heavenly kings will enter the bodies of the worthy rulers of neighboring states, and will attack this state. So that's interesting. Sort of a self-balancing thing, karmically speaking, right? And the same is true in our daily lives. If our mind isn't right, or we let ourselves stray into bad habits, or more to the point, we're influenced into bad behavior, negative behavior, unlife-affirming behavior, our lives, lives of others, all of it, then the forces of life, which here have names like Brahma, Chakra, so on, deities, whatever you want to call them, those are just labels given to the different forces of life, right? Like the sun. The sun is very important to, well, plant life, our lives, food, temperate climate, vitamin D, right? So we could look upon, like native peoples have done all over the world, indigenous peoples, I should say, as being the powers that support life, like deities, like gods. Not because they are entities that have a conscious contribution to us, but because of their function in our conscious perception. Right? So these forces will then, if you're behaving poorly or stupidly, if you go out naked and lay in the 112-degree weather under a bright burning sun, if you're convinced that that somehow will expiate your illnesses or whatever, the sun will conspire to burn your skin. But it's not that it's a conscious entity doing that. It's just a way of saying that life has its balances. And if you operate in a way that is out of balance, then you will incur the results. Follow? So, for example, he says, King Krita was attacked by King Himatala, and King Mihirakula was overthrown by King Baladitya. Kings Krita and Mihirakula were rulers in India who attempted to eradicate Buddhism. In China, too, all those rulers who tried to destroy Buddhism were attacked by worthy rulers. So this may seem more esoteric and less obvious than a sunburn, but in fact, that's the equation he's using. Buddhism, he's saying here, explicates the actual reality of the way the life process works in all things. And if you act counter to that life process, then the life process itself has no other response than to injure you in some way. Right? A flame is a flame. If you deny it's a flame and you stick your hand in it, the flame burns you. But is it the flame's fault? Do you see where the responsibility always lies in Buddhism? In your mind, in my mind, in our perception. If we find ourselves in duress, we have to ask ourselves, how are we misaligning ourselves with the grand process of life? We are acting against the law. The law is the process of life. Myoho Renge Kyo, we gave it a name. Does this make sense? But the situation in Japan today is much worse. For here, the rulers appear to be supporters of the Buddhist teachings, but they assist the monks who are destroying Buddhism and persecute the practitioner of the correct teaching. There's a lot of muddled minds here. As a result, ignorant people all fail to realize what is happening, and even wise persons, if they are no more than moderately wise, have difficulty grasping the situation. Even the lesser deities of heaven, I suspect, do not understand. For this reason, the confusion and depravity in Japan today are even greater than those in India or China in the past. In the Decline of the Law Sutra, the Buddha speaks as follows. The Decline of the Law Sutra. Interesting name, isn't it? Because he knew this would happen. Quote, after I've entered nirvana, this is Shakyamuni, in the troubled times when the 5 cardinal sins prevail, the way of the devil will flourish. The devil will appear in the form of Buddhist monks and attempt to confuse and destroy my teachings. Those who do evil will become as numerous as the sands of the ocean, while the good will be extremely few, perhaps no more than 1 or 2 persons. This is the power of manipulation, deception, the will to power, can obscure and even obliterate truth. Look at the machinations of politics today. Politics used to be quite an honorable thing to aspire to, because it was about the good governance of people. But now it's a contest of who can make the most money or who can control the most land or whatever equation. Politics today is about repeating the same lies over and over again until you think they would appear to be truths, but they are not. Empirically, they are not. But will behave as though they are. So what happens when you conduct yourself in that way? Complete denial of truth. You're going to reap what you sow, as it were. You're trying to create a fake world, and people who are weak will accept your fake world as true, even though they know deep down inside it's a bunch of baloney. But because they're more afraid of not towing the line than they are of speaking truth to power, they just kind of flow with it. And now you have these masses of people who now are just repeating the lies like they're convincing themselves. And they're angry about it because they know when people look at them and think, you know you're lying. That's really a personal affront to them now, because you're damaging my fake world. How can you do that, you arrogant right? So this is nothing new. It's been going on since man. And he goes on, and the Nirvana Sutra states, those who thus are able to take a resolute mind and conviction in works such as this Nirvana Sutra will be as few as the specks of dirt that can be placed on a fingernail. But those who are notable to take a resolute mind in this sutra will be as numerous as the specks of dirt in all the worlds of the 10 directions. These passages from the scriptures are extremely apt, considering the times we live in, and they are deeply etched in my mind. Nowadays in Japan, one hears people everywhere declaring, quote, I believe in the Lotus Sutra, and I too believe in the Lotus Sutra. If we took them at their word, we would have to conclude that there is not a heart who slanders the law. But the passages from the sutra that I've just read, or quoted, says that in the latter day, the slanderers of the law will occupy all the lands in the 10 directions, while those who uphold the correct teaching will take up no more than land than can be placed on top of a fingernail. What the sutra says and what the people of the world today say are as different as fire is from water. People these days say that in Japan, Nichiren is the only one who slanders the law. But the sutra says that there will be more slanderers of the law than the great earth itself can hold. The Decline of the Law Sutra says that there will be only one or two good persons, and the Nirvana Sutra says that the believers can fit into the space of a fingernail. If we accept what the sutras say, then in Japan, Nichiren is the only good person, the one who fits into the space of a fingernail. Therefore, I hope that people who are seriously concerned about the matter will consider carefully whether they want to accept what the sutra says or what the world says. Someone might object that the passage in the Nirvana Sutra speaks about the votaries of the Nirvana Sutra being as few as the specks of dirt that can be placed on a fingernail, while I am talking about the Lotus Sutra. I would reply to this as follows. The Nirvana Sutra itself says, quote, "When this sutra was preached, the prediction had already been made in the Lotus Sutra that the 8,000 voice hearers would attain Buddhahood," end quote. The great teacher Miao Lo says, quote, "The Nirvana Sutra is itself pointing to the Lotus Sutra and saying that it is the ultimate," end quote. The Nirvana Sutra is calling the Lotus Sutra the ultimate. Therefore, when followers of the Nirvana school say that the Nirvana Sutra is superior to the Lotus Sutra, it's the same thing as calling a retainer a lord or a servant a master. They just don't get it. To read the Nirvana Sutra means to read the Lotus Sutra. For the Nirvana Sutra is like a worthy who rejoices to see another holding his sovereign in esteem even when he himself is treated with contempt. Thus, the Nirvana Sutra would despise and regard as its enemies anyone who tried to demote the Lotus Sutra and praise the Nirvana Sutra instead. Because the job of the Nirvana Sutra is to guide people back to the Lotus Sutra. So if you put the Lotus Sutra down, what are you saying about the Nirvana Sutra? What are you, useless rag? With this example in mind, one must understand the following point. If there are likewise those who would read the Flower Garden Sutra, the Meditation Sutra, the Mahavarachana Sutra, or some other sutra, and they do so thinking that the Lotus Sutra is inferior to those sutras, then they are doing violence to the very heart of those sutras, because their meaning all depends on the elucidations of the Lotus. Even though one reads the Lotus Sutra and appears to believe in it, if one thinks that one may also attain the way through any other sutra as well, then one is not really reading the Lotus Sutra. For example, the great teacher Chai Xiang wrote a work in 10 volumes entitled The Treatise on the Profundity of the Lotus Sutra, in which he praised the Lotus Sutra. But Miao Lo criticized the work, saying, quote, "There are slanderers in it. How can it be regarded as sincere praise?" Now, see, you can't really understand that unless you go and read more into it and find out what that's pointing to, right? It's just because a work says the Lotus Sutra is preeminent, it may just be false praise in order to lead you somewhere else, to some other thinking, some other influence. See, thinkers, educators, teachers, they can be very clever if they have an agenda outside awakening, outside a pursuit for truth, knowledge, right? Chia Xiang was, in fact, an offender against the Lotus Sutra. Thus, when he was defeated by Tendai, and served him, he no longer lectured on the Lotus Sutra. Quote, "If I were to lecture on it," he said, "I could not avoid falling back into the paths of evil," and for 7 years he made his own body a bridge for Tendai to walk on. In other words, he served Tendai utterly. He never spoke a word either against him or around him or tried to influence the students of Tendai in any way. He became obeisant, in other words, to Tendai. He knew the nature of his error. Similarly, the great teacher Tzu-en wrote a work in 10 volumes entitled Praising the Profundity of the Lotus Sutra, in which he praised the Lotus Sutra, but the great teacher Dengyo criticized it, saying, "Though he praises the Lotus Sutra, he destroys its heart." See, people will do this. They'll show false praise for something or someone or whatever in order to become closer to you, a stronger influence to you. You'll let down your guard and go, well, maybe, he's not so bad or she's not so bad. Maybe she understands what she's doing, and let me let down my guard and communicate with her and let her speak with my attentions. Therefore, I get influenced wrongly because she or he offered this false praise, right? If we consider these examples carefully, we will realize that among those who read the Lotus Sutra and sing its praises, there are many who are destined for the hell of incessant suffering. Even men like Chiet-sang and Tzu-en were actually slanderers of the one vehicle of the Lotus Sutra, and if such can be said of them, it applies even more to men like Kobo, Jikaku, and Chisho, who displayed open contempt for the Lotus Sutra. There are those, like the great teacher Chiet-sang, who ceased giving lectures, dispersed the group of disciples that they had gathered around him, and even made his body into a bridge for Tendai. But in spite of these actions, the offense of his earlier slanders of the Lotus Sutra was not, I expect, so easily wiped out. The crowd of people who despised and abused bodhisattvas never disparaging, although they later came to believe in his teachings and became his followers, still carried the burden of their former actions and had to spend 1,000 kalpas in the Avishya hell as a result. Again, I remind you, this whole Gosho is about respect for true teachers and the law, Myoho Renge-kyo, but also in part and parcel of that is the cause and effect. Your behavior, your attitude, your intent imprints. And so, yes, we all endeavor to correct ourselves, hopefully. I think certainly as Nichiren school, Lotus Sutra school Buddhists, this is our central core, or should be, that we avail ourselves to our better natures, our greater natures, our true natures, our Myoho Renge-kyo nature, right? But we are born, literally, of energy, karmic energies that has a history, and that must be cleansed, clarified, lest it continue to impact moment to moment, past, present, future, right, are all extant in this particular moment. So, am I 50% Buddhist? Am I 90% Buddhist? Am I 100% Myoho Renge-kyo? Am I 70% Myoho Renge-kyo? Am I 10% Myoho Renge-kyo? Because all of it, we are living in this moment, right now, and now, and now. See, these are one after another. And this is why chanting to mandala is so important a tool that Nichiren's given us. Because he understood that to immerse ourselves, to single-mindedly awaken Buddha in our lives, is to be allow ourselves to be completely consumed by that clarity It's not easy, because obviously being in samsaric form, it's not a natural place for us to be, but it is a part and the impetus for us to actually be. We're just preoccupied in samsara by the formations of samsara. How do we transcend samsara while living in it? No easy task. Any Buddhist will tell you. Nichiren goes on. Accordingly, if men like Kobo, Jikaku, and Chisho had lectured on the Lotus Sutra, even if they had repented of their errors, they would still have had difficulty making up for their former grave offenses. Right? They would still seem tainted. Ask anyone who's been accused of any kind of crime, petty or not. Once you know that about somebody, doesn't it always forever taint your idea of who that person is? I mean, even if they do 1,000 great things, even to the point where you think this is a great woman, a great man, you know, look at where they came from. It's still there, right? So it's hard to expiate karma, right? Especially if you don't know what it is. And of course, as we know, this is why the word resolve is, you hear me say it a lot, but understand that it's also another word that you can use with that is confidence. The higher your confidence is in Myoho Renge-kyo, the more you will live it, experience it, right? Your percentage Buddha goes up. Start using that a lot now. And of course, as we know, they never had any such change of heart. On the contrary, they completely ignored the Lotus Sutra and spent day and night carrying out the true word practices and morning and evening preaching the true word doctrines. So these were real hypocrites. The Bodhisattva Vasubandhu and Ashvaghosha were both on the point of cutting out their tongues because of the offense they had committed by adhering to Hinayana doctrines and criticizing the Mahayana. Vasubandhu declared that although the Agama Sutras of the Hinayana were the words of the Buddha, he would not let his tongue utter them even in jest. And Ashvaghosha, as an act of penance, wrote Awakening of a Resolute Mind and Conviction, in which he refuted the Hinayana teachings. So attached were they to early teachings that it stopped them cold from progressing along with Shakyamuni's teachings. They got to the 3rd grade and said, this is the path. Screw 4th grade, screw 6th grade, junior high, high school, college. All of those are unnecessary. They're childish theory, or they're just for special people. These 3rd grade teachings, this is the path. This is in essence exactly what they were saying as adherents of Hinayana teachings. Right? Listen to any Theravada Buddhist tell you about how those other teachings are just, they're special nonsense. Think of it this way. When Shakyamuni said, study all of Buddhist scholarship, and even non-Buddhist scholarship, so that you can locate and grow your path to Buddha, to your Buddha nature. How does that agree with any sect or organization saying, this is it, don't look there? Plain and simple, that's the lie. This is why I teach all of Buddhism, and I talk to you about the Vimalakirti. And as Nichiren is my best teacher. You know, Tendai didn't leave as many things for me to read, or Nagarjuna, but I read all of theirs as well. And all of them are intense scholars, and they always speak through many sutras, not just the Lotus. Because to understand the value of the Lotus is to understand the value amongst all of the teachings. So yes, we're Lotus Sutra practitioners, absolutely. But we're Lotus Sutra practitioners in the light of the entire library. We don't just read and follow the one book. We read and follow the culmination of all the books as expressed in the Lotus. That's a very different proposition. That's Buddha wisdom, right? The great teacher Changxiang, in time, went to the great teacher Tendai and begged for his lectures. In the presence of 100 or more distinguished Buddhists, he threw himself on the ground, and with sweat pouring from every part of his body and tears of blood streaming from his eyes, he declared that from then on he would not see his disciples any more and would no longer lecture on the Lotus Sutra. As he said, quote, "If I were to go on facing my disciples and lecturing on the Lotus Sutra, they might suppose that I have the ability to understand the sutra correctly, when in fact I do not." He was overwhelmed by the scholarship of Tendai and understood that his teachings were, with every word, misplaced, incorrect. Chishang was both older and more eminent than Tendai, and yet, in the presence of others, he deliberately put Tendai on his back and carried him across the river. Whenever Tendai was about to ascend the lecture platform, Chishang would take him on his back and carry him up to the platform. After Tendai's death, when Chishang was summoned into the presence of the emperor of the Sui dynasty, he is said to have wept and dragged his feet like a little child whose mother has just died. When one examines profundity of the Lotus Sutra by the great teacher Chishang, one finds that it is not the kind of commentary that speaks slanderously of the Lotus Sutra. It merely says that although the Lotus Sutra and the other Mahayana sutras differ in the profundity of their teachings, they are at heart one and the same. Is this statement perhaps the source of the change or the charge that the works slanders the law? Do you understand that? So when Chishang was teaching the Lotus Sutra, he taught it as though it were the same as all the others. And that's incorrect, isn't it? So on a very profound level, he didn't really understand. And this is what they're calling the slander, that he realized for himself. He didn't realize the importance of the Lotus Sutra, the culmination of all the others in the Lotus Sutra. Both Cheng Quan of the Flower Garland School and Shan Wu Wei of the True Word School declared that the Lotus Sutra and the Mahavajrayana Sutra reveal the same principle. Right? Remember that? Therefore, if the great teacher Chishang is to be blamed for the statement I have just referred to, then the Tripitaka master Shan Wu Wei can hardly escape being blamed as well. He wasn't properly distinguishing. The Tripitaka master Shan Wu Wei, in his youth, was the ruler of a kingdom in central India. But he abdicated the throne and traveled to other lands, where he met two men named Shusho and Shodai, from whom he received instruction in the Lotus Sutra. He built hundreds and thousands of stone stupas and appeared to be a votary of the Lotus Sutra. Later, however, after he had received instruction in the Mahavajrayana Sutra, he seems to have concluded that the Lotus Sutra is inferior to the Mahavajrayana Sutra. He did not insist on this opinion at first, but came to do so later when he went to China and became a teacher to Emperor Huizong of the Tang Dynasty. In other words, influenced by his ego and his lust for power, he decided that the Mahabharata Sutra, which was more fresh on his mind, was superior to the Lotus Sutra, obviating that he didn't get the point of emanations of Shakyamuni, culminations in the Lotus Sutra. With everything we've discussed about the Lotus and the lifespan chapter, how somebody could read the Mahabharata Sutra and be convinced that it's equal or better. I mean, this indicates just an earthly fascination with possession again. You know, mudras and mantras, all human attachments. The Lotus has no such attachments, if you really read it. Perhaps because he was consumed by jealousy, Nichiren continues, of the Tendai school, he died very suddenly and found himself bound with 7 cords of iron and dragged by 2 wardens of hell to the court of Yama, the Lord of Hell, which Yama is an earthly realm, right? But he was told that his lifespan had not reached its conclusion and therefore was sent back to the human world. You ever been hit by trauma, loss of a loved one, incarceration for some crime that you either did intentionally or got wrapped up in something, destructive and ended up paying for it? That's like being dragged into hell, isn't it? And then you get out, you get another chance. While in hell, he suspected that he had been brought before Yama because he had slandered the Lotus Sutra, and he therefore quickly set aside all his true word mudras and mantras and methods of concentration, and instead chanted the passage from the Lotus Sutra that begins, quote, "Now this threefold world is all my Shakyamuni Buddha's domain," end quote. Whereupon the cords that bound him fell away, and he was returned to life. So he got paroled. On another occasion, he was ordered by the imperial court to recite prayers for rain, and rain did in fact suddenly begin to fall, but a huge wind also rose up and did great damage to the country. Later, when he really did die, his disciples gathered around his deathbed and praised the remarkable way in which he had died, but in fact, he fell into the great citadel of the hell of incessant suffering. You may ask how I know that this is so. I would reply that if you examine his biography, you will find it stated, quote, "Looking now at Shan Wu Wei's remains, one can see that they are gradually shrinking. The skin is turning blackish, and the bones are exposed," end quote. Shan Wu Wei's disciples. I'm starting to run a little long here. I'm going to end with this short paragraph, and then we'll continue in the next one, okay? Shan Wu Wei's disciples perhaps did not realize that this was a sign that after his death he had been reborn in hell, but supposed that it was a manifestation of his virtue. Yet, in describing it, the author of the biography exposed Shan Wu Wei's guilt, recording that after his death his body gradually shrank, the skin turned black, and the bones began to show. So, this is not an afterlife. This is just a poetic demonstration that in the law, the life process, the Myoho Renge Kyo, cause and effect. Our bodies, you may not have heard this, but I've been told many times by seniors in practice that they either observed firsthand a relative or a leader that they knew who passed away, and they had that kind of an archaic, restful smile on their faces, and their bodies didn't turn blue while in the hospital when they passed. Um, I hear stories like that, and they sound fanciful and so forth, but I tend, because I've heard it so many times, to believe that, um, again, we are energies. And even though when we pass, there's a residual for several hours, even days. There's all kinds of rituals talking about that in Buddhism. How we can continue to connect with those energies that aren't completely diffused yet. I don't think that that's entirely unscientific. Um, but certainly, if you were making life affirming causes in your life, when you pass, your heart stops beating, your brain stops working, you as a human being have passed on. Um, I think the people that witness that or that are around that, who know you, will feel some of a radiance of life emanating from your corpse. Not because you are doing that, but because this is the remnant of energy you're leaving behind, a very life affirming, light energy. But certainly turning black and shrinking is not a very life affirming look. It would indicate a residual that is in retreat, in shame, right? So that's kind of the way I get that, you know. Anyway, I'm just a human, so I think we really look hard for traces of our loved ones when they cease. But we have to understand that those traces are our shared karmic energies, our shared perceptions of those formations of my aunt who passed away of cancer decades ago, a decade ago. She still lives with me, in me, karmically, though I know that earthly she's gone. There is no other life for her other than my mental conjuring of her, right? Okay, I guess with that, I'll call this one a video. And thank you once again for participating, being here. Don't forget about the podcasts, available everywhere. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care of yourself. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Stay healthy. Keep your practice strong. And I will see you soon.